Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're diving into one of pop culture's most enduring and honestly kind of baffling phenomena. I'm talking about The Simpsons' weird knack for seemingly predicting future events. You know how it goes, someone posts a clip online, and suddenly a joke from like 20 years ago lines up perfectly with today's news. It really makes you wonder, are the writers just, I don't know, super prescient or maybe time travelers or something else going on?
It's a great question. And yeah, today we're going to explore some specific times where the show's stories have, well, weirdly mirrored real-world stuff. We'll look at everything, big political shifts, tech innovations, even some really bizarre, out-there occurrences. What's fascinating is how these predictions can be, shocking, strange, genuinely funny, but then somehow they make sense looking back.
Right. So our mission today is, first, let's unpack some of the most interesting past predictions, the ones that already happened. And then, using the great sources you've gathered, we're going to dig into what the show might have predicted for, say, 2025 and maybe even beyond. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, let's kick off with a visual one, a big one. On the London skyline. Back in 1995, the episode Lisa's Wedding, right? We see Lisa's future, she's in London, and bam, right there behind Tower Bridge, there's this really pointy building. It looks almost exactly like the Shard. But here's the kicker. Construction on the Shard didn't even start until 2009.
Yeah, that's a classic. And what's interesting there is how an artist draws, basically a random cool-looking future building. And then years later, we look back and say, wow, they predicted it. It really shows you the power of, retrospective interpretation. We connect the dots after the fact.
Totally. And speaking of weird connections, how about this one? From 2002, Papa's got a brand new badge. Fat Tony, the mobster, right? He's caught gluing cotton balls onto ferrets and selling them as toy poodles. This is a ridiculous cartoon plot, you'd think.
Absolutely absurd.
But then, in 2013, get this, a guy in Argentina was actually caught doing pretty much the same thing. He was selling ferrets that he'd, groomed and maybe even given steroids to, passing them off as poodles for $150 each.
See, it's those peculiar, almost unbelievable ones, the ones you just can't imagine happening in real life. That's what makes this whole Simpsons prediction thing so uncanny, so compelling. You gotta wonder what they're seeing.
Okay, and for everyone glued to their phones, social media, this one might make you look twice. Edna's Blend Agenda 2012. Homer's looking at his smartphone, and one of the apps on his screen, clear as day, has an X symbol. Years before Twitter rebranded to X. It's a tiny detail, blink and you miss it, but wow.
Right. It definitely catches your eye now.
Yeah.
And it shows how even these obscure background details, maybe totally unintentional at the time, can suddenly gain huge significance later on. It's that weird alignment that fuels these prediction talks.
Okay, moving into pop culture. Mr. Freeze in Batman and Robin, the 1997 movie. Remember those awful puns?
Oh, God, don't remind me. Ice to see you. Ooh.
Exactly. Well, check this. Last exit to Springfield, way back in 1993. There's a McBain movie within the show, and McBain bursts out of an ice statue and says,
Yo.
Yep, ice to see you. It's like they knew that movie was going to be a disaster full of bad puns.
That's brilliant. It really was a laughably bad disaster, that film.
Yeah.
Maybe the Simpsons writers were just experts at parodying bad action movie tropes, and reality just caught up.
Could be. And sticking with movies, remember the ads for the Itchy and Scratchy movie in the show, season 4, 1992? There's that billboard, Scratchy's decapitated, blood spraying off the billboard, super graphic, very Simpsons.
Very memorable.
Well, years later, for the promotion of Kill Bill in New Zealand, I think, they did a billboard where fake blood literally dripped down off the poster onto the wall, even onto the street below.
Wow, okay, that's a strong visual link. Shows how the show tapped into that, edgy humor that later popped up in real advertising.
And here's a really strange double prediction, all in one episode. Lisa versus Malibu Stacy, 1994. Okay, first, it shows a world completely engulfed in a doll days, right? Which felt eerily like the whole Barbie movie craze in 2023.
Right, the Barbie mania parallel.
But wait, there's more. In that same episode, there's a quick news report on TV, and the anchor mentions, almost as a throwaway line, the president was arrested.
Okay.
And this is the weird part. This aired decades ago, but it just so happened that Donald Trump was arrested in August 2023, right smack in the middle of all the Barbie movie hype.
Whoa. Okay, the timing on that one, connecting those two things from the same old episode, that's an eerie coincidence that definitely makes you pause and think, how does real life keep echoing these satirical bits?
Right. Okay, switching gears. Sports and business. Boy Meets Curl, 2010. Homer and Marge are on a curling team. They go to the Olympics, and they win gold. against Sweden.
An underdog story, Simpson style.
Exactly. Fast forward to the 2018 Winter Olympics. The U.S. men's curling team, they won gold against Sweden. It actually happened.
That one is truly incredible. The specificity, curling isn't exactly like the biggest sport they could have picked. Predicting an underdog win against that specific team, that's pretty remarkable foresight.
And on the business side, remember Marge's line from Please Homer, Don't Hammer M?
Mm-hmm.
That was 2007. They walk past an empty store and she sighs, "Oh, a J.C. Penney's used to be here."
Okay.
That line aired 13 years before J.C. Penney actually filed for bankruptcy during the pandemic in 2020.
Yeah, that's a strong one. Even with the slight name variation, J.C. Penney's, it taps into that bigger trend, doesn't it? The decline of those big department stores was happening. It was in the air. Their gag just nailed a sentiment that became very real later on.
Okay, let's touch on global health and corporate giants. Lisa Sachs, 1997.
Oh.
There's a scene where Marge offers Bart a book. The title, Curious George and the Ebola Virus.
Ebola in 97.
Yeah. This is when Ebola was, like you said, relatively unknown to most people. It predates the big outbreaks in 2000 and 2014 that brought it into the headlines.
That one. Well, fans definitely point to it. The connection might feel a bit shaky to some, maybe just a random, edgy book title joke. But it is interesting they picked that specific, obscure virus back then. It speaks to how things can bubble under the surface before becoming major news.
Fair enough. But how about this one? The Disney-Fox merger. In Bart to the Future, an episode we'll come back to, there's this quick shot, like a sign or a building facade, and it lists 20th Century Fox as just like a division of a bigger company that includes Disney.
Right, I remember that visual gag.
This was shown 19 years before Disney actually acquired 21st Century Fox in 2019.
Okay, that one is pretty crazy. I mean, media consolidation was happening. Sure, it was a trend. But naming those specific companies together almost 2 decades early, that's harder to just brush off as a lucky guess. Really striking foresight, seemingly.
So, okay, we've looked back at some truly uncanny predictions that have already kind of played out. What about the future? What does The Simpsons potentially have in store for us, say, in 2025 or just around the corner?
Right, looking ahead. When you dig into the sources on future predictions, it's a real mix. Some scenarios are clearly just jokes, very funny. Some seem, well, shockingly plausible. And a few are, frankly, pretty dystopian. It's crucial to remember, though, these writers are incredibly sharp observers of society. They notice trends, anxieties, and then they satirize them, often taking them to an extreme.
That's a really good point. So let's start with their visions for technology and work. There's Homer losing his job because of an alcohol test, like in that Devil and Homer Simpson Treehouse of Horror bit. That kind of resonates with anxieties about automation, right? And then you have episodes like Them Robot, where the AI robots malfunction, even turn evil. Thinking about how fast AI and robotics are moving now, what do you make of those predictions? Is that something for 2025?
Well, what's interesting there is how The Simpsons consistently taps into these deep-seated collective anxieties. The fear of AI taking jobs or robots going rogue. That's not new. It's been a theme in sci-fi and public debate for decades. The show uses it as a satirical mirror, reflecting our own worries about where tech might lead. It's less a specific forecast, maybe, and more a commentary on our fears. What if this happens?
That makes a lot of sense. It's like holding up a funhouse mirror to our own concerns.
Yeah.
But some of their tech ideas are more, I guess, straightforwardly futuristic, like Bart getting a hologram message in Bart to the Future, widespread holograms for calls and stuff.
Holographic communication.
And hover cars. In one future episode, Bart and Lisa are just cruising around in hover cars like it's normal. Right. And this isn't pure fantasy anymore, right? Samson's Guy is supposedly releasing the first actual hover car to the public in 2025.
Yeah, those examples show the writers looking at emerging tech buzzwords or concepts and just running with them. They extrapolate it out sometimes logically, sometimes just for laughs. What was a sci-fi gag back then is now an actual engineering goal. That's where the satire gets really interesting when reality starts chasing it.
Okay, what about teaching AI? There's a prediction about Homer and other teachers instructing AI robots. And these robots then become smart enough to apply for student loans and go to Ivy League schools.
Huh. That sounds perfectly Simpsons. Again, playing with the idea of AI surpassing us in unexpected ways.
And training to live in space. Establishing a settlement on Mars. There's an episode with Exploration Incorporated doing just that. which connects to what NASA, Elon Musk, and others are actually working towards now, even simulating Martian environments.
Right, tapping into that ongoing human ambition for space exploration.
Baby translators. Remember Herb Powell's invention? Translating baby talk into actual English. Imagine how handy or maybe terrifying that would be.
Definitely convenient
Yeah.
and fun.
In Apple Vision Pro, there was a 2016 episode set in the future where people wear headsets
Yeah.
that let them see whatever they want, transport anywhere virtually without actually doing anything. The similarity to the Vision Pro is pretty eerie, isn't it?
It really is. That visual prediction is quite striking.
Self-driving cars, too. They've shown malfunctioning ones, Homer's car driving itself.
Yeah.
Even as real automated driving tech advances, the show seems to anticipate the glitches.
Yeah, capturing both the promise and the potential pitfalls.
Solar cars. Lisa invents one for a race in Path to Glory. And now there are a few solar car models actually on the market, so that feels plausible for, say, 2025 progress.
Plausible indeed.
And finally, virtual dining. Homer and Marge eating through feeding tubes while wearing VR headsets.
It's a gag, sure, but it highlights the potential, maybe the dangers of overusing VR and that kind of immersive tech. Exactly. So looking at all these tech examples, you could argue it's less about prediction and more about the writers needing new material. They had to keep the show fresh, relevant to modern times, society, and keep both old and new fans engaged. So they observed trends, they read the science pages, they thought about what if.
That's a solid counter perspective. Keen observation rather than psychic powers. Okay, beyond tech, things get heavier. Let's talk politics and society. The big one. Bart to the Future from 2000. Lisa becomes president after what she calls a terrible Trump administration.
Right, that episode gets cited constantly.
And what blows people's minds is the visual stuff. When Kamala Harris was elected vice president in 2020, her purple suit, the pearl necklace, it looked incredibly similar to what President Lisa Simpson wore in that episode 2 decades earlier.
The visual echo there is undeniable. It's one of those specific details that really fuels the whole prediction narrative. It's just so specific, hard to ignore.
And speaking of Trump, that same episode mentions him as a prior president, which, actually happened in 2016. But the show didn't stop there. Sources point to other episodes showing signs like Trump 2012, Trump 2016, Trump 2020, Trump 2024, even Trump 2028. Now, we have to be clear. We're just reporting what's in the sources here, not endorsing any political outcome. But were these just running gags or something else?
It's a really interesting pattern. You could argue The Simpsons was simply reflecting Trump's long-standing public profile and media presence, his flirtations with running for office over the years. They turned that into a recurring satirical political storyline. Whether you call it prediction or just sharp observation of a known personality, it definitely gets people talking. Again, we're just looking at what the show depicted.
And they didn't start with Donald Trump. One source points to an October 2016 episode where Homer is shown wearing an Ivanka 2028 badge, suggesting her as a future presidential candidate.
Another example of the show throwing political names out there in a future context.
There's even mention of a quick offhand joke in one episode featuring a newspaper headline, President Trump shot. A prediction of an assassination attempt.
That sounds like a very dark, potentially throwaway gag typical of the show's edgier humor. Again, presented as satire within the show's world.
Okay, economic collapse. We touched on this. Treehouse of Horror 9, Homer causes one, and Lisa's presidency in Bart to the Future inherits a massive budget crunch. The country is broke. Sources draw parallels to, say, Kamala Harris discussing potential economic issues after the Trump administration. It taps into ongoing anxieties, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. These larger themes, economic instability, national debt, the recurring anxieties in the real world. The Simpsons has always been brilliant at satirizing those big societal fears. It's less about predicting a specific collapse on a specific date and more about reflecting that underlying worry that exists in society.
What about global conflict, World War III? Some sources mention Homer training the family for nuclear war, or another episode comically showing a huge global conflict. And specifically, the show apparently predicted the Russia-Ukraine war. Sources mention how eerily close some fictional depictions were to real events.
Again, these are heavy themes. The show often uses hyperbole and satire to comment on geopolitical tensions, the threat of war, the absurdity of conflict. Pointing to specific parallels, like with Russia-Ukraine, highlights how sometimes satire can cut disturbingly close to reality, or maybe how certain conflicts have recognizable patterns. It's vital we remember the show presents these as fictional scenarios, often for dark comedic effect.
Nuclear apocalypse, the end of the world. They've joked about that too. Homer the Great had a joke about nuclear disaster aftermath. Homer even predicted the world's end based on a Bible verse.
Standard Simpsons fare, taking huge, terrifying concepts and making them somehow mundane or funny within their world.
And remember, the Simpsons movie from 2007. Springfield gets trapped under a giant dome by the EPA, the government, and Marge yells, EPA, EPA, trapped forever, it's all come true.
Okay.
Considering, current discussions about cost of living, climate change, potential government controls, does that dome resonate differently now?
That's a really interesting one to revisit. It plays on classic themes: distrust of authority, environmental issues, feeling trapped by circumstances or bureaucracy. It's satire, obviously extreme satire, but those underlying feelings, being controlled, facing consequences of societal actions, they persist. So yeah, maybe it does resonate differently today. It prompts you to think critically about control and consequence.
One more weird one. Mind control through music. An episode where Bark's boy band is actually a secret U.S. Army plot, using subliminal messages in the songs to brainwash young people for recruitment.
Okay, that's peak conspiracy theory satire. Again, taking a real-world phenomenon, boy bands, military recruitment, subliminal messaging fears, and mashing them together for comedic effect. With all these political and dystopian predictions, it's so important for listeners to think critically, question the assumptions, consider different viewpoints. The show isn't endorsing these futures, it's often mocking the possibilities or the fears surrounding them.
Absolutely. Critical thinking is key here. Okay, to wrap up the future predictions, let's end on a lighter note. Back to sports. A specific one for football fans or soccer fans, depending where you are. A 1997 episode, Season 9, apparently showed a World Cup final between Portugal and Mexico. And in the show, Portugal wins. So keep an eye on the 2026 World Cup, maybe. Given current football dynamics, that's one to watch.
Huh. We'll see about that one. Add it to the list.
And, wow. Just like that, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into The Simpsons. Just uncanny ability to seemingly predict the future.
Yeah, it's quite a ride when you lay it all out, whether these moments are, like we said, just funny jokes, surprisingly spot on, or kind of dark. They definitely keep sparking conversations and curiosity. And I still lean toward the idea that it's mostly about the writers being incredibly sharp observers. Their finger is just so firmly on the pulse of society, trends, anxieties. They capture the zeitgeist, maybe better than anyone. That keen observation often looks like premonition in hindsight, but it doesn't make it any less fascinating to track.
Couldn't agree more. As we head towards 2025 and beyond, well, only time will tell which, if any, of these other scenarios actually come to pass. But hey, let's just hope that nuclear apocalypse prediction stays firmly in the joke category, right? Because really, the only thing we want to see going boom is, the popcorn in our microwave while we're watching the show. So as you, our listener, think about all this, what stands out? Which of these predictions feels most plausible to you? Or maybe most terrifying? And what does it even mean that a cartoon, of all things, has become this strange, enduring, cultural benchmark for trying to guess what's next? Something to think about.